Co-chairs, ladies and gentlemen, it's a huge privilege to introduce you to this year's ISHLT Lifetime Achievement recipient, Professor John Dark, who has been a mentor, a colleague and friend of mine for 30 years. John started his medical career at Newcastle University, where he started to study medicine in 1971. For those who don't know Newcastle, it's an industrial town in the north of England. It's a football or soccer-mad city. And when John was there, unfortunately the football team was rather mediocre, but the highlight was the Rolling Stones were on tour. But it's very interesting, years later the same thing, a mediocre football team and the Rolling Stones are still on tour. After completing his medical training and his house jobs in Newcastle, John moved to Glasgow, where he undertook his general surgical and then cardiothoracic training in the Gothic splendour of Glasgow Royal Infirmary. After completing that training, he took a transplant fellowship and worked with Magdi Yacoub and Donald Ross at Harefield Hospital. Quite a change in the architectural splendour, going from the Gothic splendour of Glasgow to the brutal architecture of Harefield Hospital. But Harefield was a real beacon of excellence in the transplant field, and he spent 2 years there learning organ retrieval and implantation with world-leading surgeons. He then took a research fellowship here in Toronto, where he spent a year working with Joel Cooper and Alex Patterson at the very early stages of the emergence of single lung transplantation, and from there went to his first consultant job, again back in Scotland, back to some more Gothic splendour at Edinburgh Royal Infirmary. However, John had a passion for transplantation. Edinburgh was not a cardiothoracic transplant unit, but back in Newcastle, the hospital had recently established a new heart and lung transplant program. The draw to that was very strong for John, and he returned there as a consultant just 1 year after his initial role in Edinburgh. That was to allow John to take on the leadership of the program in Newcastle, and he drove that forward over the next 30 years, 20 years as the director of the program, culminating in the establishment of a dedicated institute of transplantation in the hospital, which covers all organs at that time. When John arrived, and his enthusiasm for the topic allowed him to drive innovation in the program in Newcastle, and that industrial northern city in the UK became a powerhouse in the field of cardiothoracic transplantation. John performed Europe's first double lung transplant in 1990, and the UK's first DCD lung transplant right back as far as 2002. And he also was at the very early stages with EVLP, performing the UK's first successful EVLP transplant back in 2009. And over John's clinical career, he's performed over 500 heart and lung transplants. But John was not only a surgeon and dedicated innovator, he had a very strong personal touch with his patients. And here's an example of one of the earliest heart transplant recipients that John performed, Murray Elder, who was a politician in the Labour Party in Scotland and went on to become a Lord in the House of Lords in the UK. Murray had a passion for climbing the Munros in Scotland, which are mountings over 3,000 feet. John joined him on several of these trips and was there actually when Murray climbed his final Munro, the 284th out of 284, a tribute to the personal touch that John had to his patients. Murray survived 35 years with his transplanted heart and made a huge contribution to the work of the UK governments. So John is a tremendous mentor. I think there will be hundreds of people in this room whose careers have been touched and guided by John's involvement, fellows from all over the world who are now leading programs very successfully thanks to John's support and influence in their careers. He's been a leader in our community. He's been a program chair and a president of our society. He's also been a president of ISHLT, and he's held senior roles in the NHS in the UK, in the NHS Blood and Transplant as Associate Medical Director. And he's one of the few surgeons who has an honorary fellowship of the Royal College of Physicians, such is the respect within the UK community for John. So although he stopped operating about 10 years ago, he's continued to remain very active and liaise with our clinical program, and here he was as one of the guest of honors at our 40th anniversary of heart transplantation at Freeman Hospital. But John has continued in the field of research in a very emboldened and powerful way. He's a strong member of our NIHR research unit in the UK and has now published over 300 peer-reviewed original research articles, numerous other book chapters, and other manuscripts, and has over 16,000 citations to his name. He's recently completed the world's largest donor intervention study called SIGNET, again, a testament to the fact his passion for the field has not dropped in any way. John, thank you for your enormous contribution to our field and our community, and I'd like to invite you up.
Andrew, thank you. What can I say? You can't imagine how good it is to have colleagues like that. And they might even let me start my slides. I'm enormously privileged and enormously grateful to the Society for having received this award. When the email came in from Joseph, and it came in overnight, so I woke up to find the email there. I pointed this out to Joseph, and he said, yes, it's the same when Americans learn that they've won a Nobel Prize. And for me, this is the Nobel Prize. How could it be better? I'm not going to show much data. You've had a very heavy session. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my career, although Andy has said nearly everything. And I'm going to tell you how I got here. And essentially, I've stood on the shoulders of giants. And Walwork already quoted that, but then we come from a very similar background. Newton was a very smart guy, and this is what he said. An equally smart guy and a transplant surgeon said very much the same. Icing on the cake that others had spent years baking. We build up gradually when we make advances in cardiac and pulmonary transplantation. And luck has been so important. And the aphorism about luck that I was shown comes from Seneca the Younger. I apologize, this isn't the dress code to the ISHLT. Seneca the Younger was a Roman lawyer and thinker 2,000 years ago. He said, when preparation meets opportunity, you do the work, the opportunity comes along, you grab the opportunity. And that's how you make your luck. Seneca said one or two other quite clever things as well. The whole future lies in uncertainty. Live immediately. Who could possibly argue with that? Napoleon had things to say about luck. I'd rather have a general who was lucky than one who was good. And we've all had residents who were a bit like that as well. And Napoleon said politics, stupidity is not a handicap. In 2026, I suspect we can reflect the real truth of that. It's a good thing we're in Canada, isn't it? So, this is the summary. You don't just think in a straight line, you think of the sides. You have some courage. Every surgeon needs a courage. You learn from what others are doing, and I'll come back to this, about learning from history. And never be prepared to question accepted truths. If you are successful, don't be hesitant about advertising it. And I love this T-shirt. So Andy has already told you that I was a medical student in Newcastle. I came to Toronto more than 50 years ago as a third-year medical student to do my summer elective. I rotated through the Sick Children's Hospital, very inexperienced. But the senior resident at Sick Kids was this man. I told you there were going to be lots of giants here. And Len, this is years before he went to Loma Linda, 10 years before Baby Faye, and you've heard about Baby Faye, took me under his wing. I used to go in the evenings, rather than to the bar and the nurses, I went to his lab where we did pulmonary valve implants in goats. He inspired me to be a cardiac surgeon, and there was no stepping back after that. And as you've heard, I then went back to Newcastle, I qualified, I went to Glasgow to do my surgical training. Amongst the people who interviewed me prior to appointment was this man. He was the professor of cardiac surgery in Glasgow. He died a month later, and I never worked with him. But he'd given the teaching ethos that he'd taken from Stanford to surgeons in Glasgow, and I was trained by a surgeon standing across the table from me, which is something we all inherit from that era. John Walworth went through a very similar training process. And from Glasgow, I was lucky enough to go to Harefield, where you came under Yakub. Yakub never stood opposite the trainee. He was the surgeon, you were the assistant. But he taught you how to do it. He was a spectacularly good and an imaginative surgeon, made a whole series of advances. And he taught me how to do organ retrieval. There's a patient alive whose heart I retrieved in 1984. So it was a great start. And I loved flying in helicopters, which is what retrieval counted for in those days. I went on from Harefield. I already had the job in Edinburgh. Somebody said, the Toronto people are just starting lung transplants, and they want somebody who understands the heart, because they've got a difficult operation to do. So I went to Toronto. Oops. And ended up with these people in 1985, just over 40 years ago. And to delve into history very briefly, you remember the first lung transplant was done in 1964. There was a splurge of activity, and then it disappeared. It had essentially stopped. The bronchial anastomosis always broke down. And Cooper took this problem to the laboratory. He developed the omental pedicle. He showed that you could reintroduce a blood supply in 7 to 10 days, and he showed that the lung transplant would work. And so they started the clinical program. Bruce Wrights was doing the same progress with heart-lung transplant at Stanford. And when I was there, they'd done the first 2 single lungs. So it was the start of a hugely exciting era. My job in the lab was to make the paired lung, the en bloc double lung work, because as thoracic surgeons, they wanted nothing to do with the heart. I think they're still a bit like that. And so I was sent to the lab to make this work in a model using cynomolgus monkeys. And it worked. There's the first long-term survivor. The results were not the same in clinical practice, and the en bloc double lung transplant had a very short life. Again, part of how you learn from history. So I went back to Edinburgh, and then because of how Andy has described the temptation, I ended up in Newcastle, which is a wonderful city. It's a small north of England city with a river. every great river, every great city has a river. Where's the river in Toronto? But going to Newcastle was a wonderful step forward. I went to the Freeman Hospital. This is what it looked like. And you've already heard of the progress. We did a number of things, and I'll repeat some of Andrew's slides. All of this time, I was followed by Susan. She came with me to Glasgow. Neither of us look very much like that anymore. We enjoyed walking up hills. We continued to enjoy the Scottish hills. Susan has her dog, who was frequent companion when I was at work or attending an ISHLT meeting. But we made a lot of progress. They'd already done the first infant transplant, the first single lung transplant. I was in the room when it was being done, telling the surgeon, Chris McGregor, how to do it. He'd never seen a single lung. We went on to do our first heart-lung transplants. We did the first bilateral lung transplant in Europe, having spent some time back with Joel Cooper in St. Louis to learn the bilateral lung transplant. And having taken the problem of DCD to the lung, the same time as others were investigating Dirk van Reemdonk in particular, we went on and did the first in the UK, DCD lung transplant, and have continued to make progress in that respect. The great thing about working in Newcastle was with the team. When I stopped operating, people have said, "Do you miss the surgery?" You can live without the surgery. What I miss is the team. And I can show you dozens of pictures of the team. I won't, because usually we're all holding a glass of wine, and it's the bad image. But this was just what it was all about, sitting in the office discussing what it is that we're going to do. The whole team, physiotherapists, microbiologists, pulmonologists, cardiologists, retrieval coordinators, everybody there working together. And we did a lot of work, and Andy's already told you we did lots of things. For quite many years, we were the biggest heart and lung transplant in the UK because we were the only place doing children as well as adults and lungs and hearts. So we had huge numbers of trainees who are now working all over the world. The first heart transplant in Qatar was done recently by one of our trainees, and I've met colleagues at centres in North America at this meeting. And we built the Institute of Transplantation, where we collaborate with liver, kidney, pancreas transplants, all under the same building, all with the same laboratory space. It's a hugely productive environment in which to work. Andy's told you that Newcastle is a small industrial city in the north of England. But we've had 4 past presidents of the ISHLT. I think Los Angeles may have had 3, but I don't think there's anywhere else with 4. And it's been a huge pleasure and an indication of the strength of the program there. And this is at an ISHLT meeting in Florida, but coming to these meetings has been so important in building the team together. And it's the same now. That's in Boston last year. The whole breadth of the team, everybody's included. It's not just surgeons, it's not just pulmonologists. It's the whole breadth of the team. The ISHLT has been hugely important, and all of us here know that. The people who run it have been hugely important. And this is in 2011, when I was president in San Diego. This is Amanda and her team there running the ISHLT. It's now much bigger and much better. And here is Greg, who's transformed the society, and his team. And you will see there is just one person who's the same on both those pictures. And you'll know it's the lovely Susie. So, finally, what about learning from history? Are we good at it? And we're not very good. We keep making mistakes. Let me show you a couple of examples. This is a paper from the Toronto group that's transforming lung storage. They show that 10 degrees was the best temperature with better mitochondrial function and better clinical results. They went on to do a clinical trial. But if you go back to the literature, this is a paper from Toronto, showing in an animal model that 10 degrees was the best temperature. They compared different ischemic times, different temperatures. 10 degrees was the optimal storage temperature. This paper was written in 1989. But we forgot about it. We put the lungs in the icebox, we traveled home with them. Don't forget history. We think that organ perfusion is new and exciting. DCD donors are new and exciting. This is Barnard's first operation in 1967, just coming up to 60 years ago. And I've quote one page from his account. The donor was put on bypass, NRP. The organ was moved from donor to recipient. Organ perfusion was started in the recipient. They had 4 minutes of no perfusion. People are boasting non-ischemic transplants now, but they were doing it almost 60 years ago. Don't forget history. And I'm going to end with another giant. Only in Sweden would the chief come into the laboratory dressed in a sweater like that. This is Stig Steen, who 25 years ago this month published his first paper on EVLP for a DCD donor. He's gone on to develop the exciting heart perfusion devices. He's made other contributions, the Lucas chest compressor. It's 35 years since Joseph Murray got the Nobel Prize for medicine. Isn't it time we had another Nobel Prize winner for the work we're doing in heart and lung transplantation? Thank you very much for listening to me this morning.